Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today for today's TGX or Trans and Gender Expansive Inclusion Roundtable. I am Rex Wild. I use they and them pronouns, and I'm a trans and gender expansive inclusion expert. And I work with organizations of all sizes, from startups to Fortune 500s, helping them to embed trans and gender expansive inclusion practices into their organizations in order to support TGX employees. It is really wonderful to see so many familiar, but also some new faces with us here this month as we have more folks dropping in with us. So, thank you to everyone for joining us. For those that are new to the roundtable, this roundtable is really an opportunity for us to deepen our learning around trans and gender expansive organizational inclusion. So, as leaders who are advancing in, or are interested rather, in advancing TGX inclusion, whether that's to be in community, we problem solve here, we share stories, ask questions, etc. Folks are very welcome to make it interactive. Please feel free to ask questions or to chime in at any time. You can do that through the raise hand function. If you want to share any thoughts through the chat, you can go ahead in that way. And then I will always announce too, if folks want to come off mute, you're welcome to do that as well. This roundtable, what I always say is if you are here, what it tells me is that you are a leader who, amidst the current climate and amidst all of the things that are happening in and to the trans and gender expansive community, that you're really choosing to center our voices and our needs. And I think that that is something to me that personally means a lot, but that is definitely shouldn't be understated. So thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. I always want to invite folks, if you'd like to introduce yourselves to one another, please go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. So you can go ahead and share your name, pronouns, organizational affiliation, if you want to share kind of where you are in the country or in the world, wherever you may be, you're welcome to do all of that. So I'll give you a moment to feel free to introduce yourselves. As I see some more folks come in, good to see you, Crystal, Sam, Christina. And then to some of our folks that I met at NGLCC, Clay, Erica, it's nice to see you all. Thanks for joining us. And Rachel, it's good to see you. Wonderful. Well, as we move into this space, I always like to say that this space is an opportunity for all of us to learn together. So it's important to me for us to acknowledge that all of us might be coming from different levels of exposure, different levels of experience, learning, et cetera, around trans and gender expansive folks and best practices. And so I want to make room for all of us to be where we are, and that it's important that we all assume best intentions of one another. That means if someone makes a mistake, let's say they use a wrong pronoun, for example, we always welcome corrections, and those corrections should be from a place of care and connection as we seek to learn and build each other's learning together. Now, today our topic is creating inclusive community-centered programs and spaces. I'm really excited about this one. And over the past, several roundtables of this year, we've talked a lot about the impact of the current climate on trans and gender expansive communities. And so some of the topics that we've discussed this year together include self-care and capacity as allies, difficult conversations and how to navigate difficult conversations, how to make sure you're giving practical support and allyship to trans communities. And then our last one was in June on cultivating joy and our practices for cultivating joy. And so for this session this month, I wanted to focus more around creating community-centered spaces and what that actually means and how we actually do that. I think after the November 2024 election, we saw LGBTQ crisis centers report upwards of 400% increase in phone calls. And we know that Trans Lifeline was one of the crisis centers that reported those numbers. And so we know that our current climate is obviously having a really great impact on the mental health of the greater TGX community specifically, if not every single one of us, right? And so when we consider the climate, I always tell people, I'm like, this is a marathon and not a sprint. And so how do we make sure that we are creating sustainable practices that really help support ourselves and support the community as we are navigating all of this together? And I think one of the ways that we can really work to combat the harm that's being caused to trans and gender expansive communities is by creating more specific spaces and programming that actually support our community directly. And so today I wanted to discuss how to create inclusive programs and spaces. And this really isn't only for TGX communities, though this will certainly be through that lens, but that can be applied to communities across various intersections. And so we'll start today kind of with that as our focus, and then we'll also have time for general Q&A and open questions. And so we'll make space. I had some questions come in through our form that aren't specifically about this topic, and that's totally fine. So if there are other questions that folks have during our Q&A portion, you can bring those in as well. Awesome. How's that sound for everyone? Gorgeous. Ramon, good to see you. Glad you're joining us. All right. So I have really gotten the chance to, well, first, actually, I think before I dive into our topic and some of the stories that I want to share, I want to name that we actually have several people in our session today that have run community-centered programming. And so, Catherine, like I introduced to some folks, was the executive director at the Trans Chorus of Los Angeles. Sam Levra works at Planned Parenthood of Pasadena, San Gabriel Valley. Crystal Whitaker has run several different community-oriented programs in various capacities. And so I also want to name just kind of the knowledge that exists in this group as we move into this conversation, because I'm excited as well to glean from the programs that folks have already been running. And we will definitely, I'll ask you to share some of those things as well. But I've had the opportunity to help build a variety of different programs specifically for the trans and gender expansive community, and just greater LGBTQ communities at large. And so whether that has been mentorship and leadership programs, or TGX small business programs, to programs that are more centered around community building and mental health. And so I actually did want to dive into a little bit to talk about a project I ran last year that I think is a really great example that we can learn from, and actually that can be applied in many different contexts. And so last year I ran a project that was called the Neurodivergent Voices Album. And so for those of you who might know me well, you know that I am a musician and that I am a songwriter. Ramon's doing this because he's also a musician. We've gotten to work on some stuff together in the past. But I partnered with the LA County Department of Mental Health, and they specifically wanted to work on innovative programs that targeted the LGBTQ community and intersections that they hadn't necessarily considered before. And so we specifically created this program for queer and neurodivergent folks within Los Angeles. And so through this program, we brought together 12 queer and neurodivergent artists who contributed an original song on this collaborative album that we created. And so the program itself went through 4 different phases. The first was just program development for the year-long program that we did. Then we went through artist recruitment. We did pre-production, recording, and mixing, which was our third phase. And then our final phase was actually the album launch and showcase. So we did a live showcase at a local mental health nonprofit that specifically caters to LGBTQ communities. And so in this project, we really did a lot of work on the front end of the project to assess the needs of queer and trans communities in general and what we might need to consider and prepare for, especially considering the intersections we knew would exist within the participant group. But then we did an additional assessment once we knew who the artists were and to directly understand and really meet their specific needs as they shared them with us. And so just to give an example of what that assessment looked like and what we knew before we had the specific artists and after is, before we knew the exact artists who would participate, we knew that we wanted to have what we called artist advocates, which were individuals that were assigned to a smaller group of artists to help advocate for whatever their needs were throughout the project. And so, for example, if they had a higher level of sensory sensitivities that needed to be addressed in different ways, whether that was that they were going to need STEM toys or things that could help them STEM while they were in group settings. Or if they had specific needs for, we had low STEM spaces, which were spaces where folks that got a lot of sensory overload could go and have a moment, take time to cool off as they needed to, right? And so ahead of the program, we knew that we had those artist advocates in place to make sure that we knew what the individual needs of each artist were, and that the artist advocate could then advocate for those things to the rest of the leadership team or just have those needs met. Once we knew who the artists were, then things got a bit more specific. And so, what we were able to do was, for example, once we got to know what the artist's actual sensory needs were, then we were able to get, for example, multiple options of noise canceling headsets or earplugs for those with auditory sensitivities, et cetera. And so, it really helped us to do that kind of double assessment ahead of actually knowing who the artists were so that we had certain systems in place. And then again, once we knew who the artists were, so we could get more specified to the individuals as a part of that project. Because I'd say, and I'm curious if other folks have had this experience in the projects that you've run, is there's only so much that you can know before you actually have the individuals that are a part of the project that you're running, right? And that in my experience, and this is true across organizations as well, is that there tend to be different needs of different folks depending on the organization that you're working with, right? And so while you might have some higher level understanding, being able to zero in and specify with individuals once you're working with them actually really goes a long way. Now, I do want to quickly name that I got a question ahead of the session about low stim, and they asked, could you share what you mean by a low stim environment? And there was concern about what that might mean. So, when we're talking about low stim spaces, this is something we talk about in greater neurodivergent communities. Neurodivergent being a greater umbrella that can include folks on the spectrum, folks with various processing experiences, as well as folks with various mental health conditions or might have PTSD, things like that. So there's a really broad range of what neurodivergent ends up meaning. But within that, there are folks, for example, who get very overwhelmed, and I'm someone who gets what I call overstimulated. And so in that overstimulation, I will need a quiet place that doesn't have a lot of lights, doesn't have a lot of sound, so that I can come back into a calmer space. And I'm seeing some folks in the chat. They typically get called quiet time or sensory time, like at a grocery store. Great, yeah. Thanks, Thomas. And there's probably a variety of different things that folks might call it, right? Either for themselves or more globally. But low stim spaces are spaces where you basically have very low stimulus. And so we used, for example, in the studio, we had a soundproof small booth that was really cold, we turned off all of the lights and just had a couple very small warm lights available, and that had lots of like comfy pillows and things like that allowed people to have a more comfortable environment. And so that's what we mean when we say low stim spaces. It does not mean that stimming is wrong. And so stimming might be, when someone is playing with something as they are talking to you or as they're in their space, or might need to move around, might need to stim, right? If you've heard that before. And so with that, Rachel, I call it my dissociation time. That's great. I love that. And so, what low stim spaces does not mean is that it's wrong to stim. And I think that was the concern of this question at all. And what we offered in the space was we had stim toys available in every room, like through recording, through any pre-production that we were doing when we had all of the artists getting together, so that folks were actually able and welcome to stim as needed at any given time, especially in the group settings. And so we even have folks that, as we were filming and on video, when they were interviewing, who are playing with stim toys and things like that through videos as well. And the thing that was really great about that was the normalization that was able to be made of that, because we provided the opportunity for folks to have that. Um, Great. And so, I've kind of just given a small overview of what the program was, and some of the things that we did throughout it. There is an album that's available, so if folks want to go check out that album. It's streaming on all platforms. It's also available on my website. I can drop a link in the chat in just a minute for that. But I did want to talk about the results of this program and what ultimately happened through creating this space. We had 100% of the 12 participants involved say that they would absolutely participate again, and 100% of them also said it had a positive impact on their mental health. And so those were really incredible numbers for us as leaders of the project to experience, because what it meant is that it had a real sizable impact on the lives of the folks that were involved. Folks named that because the program took such considerations for their identities and just daily needs and experiences, that it normalized a lot of the characteristics that often lead them to feeling alienated in other spaces that don't directly consider or aren't directly created for folks of their identities. And so, if you want to read more about kind of the project overall, what we did, and what the impact was, we do have a final summary report available with LA County. And so, you are welcome to go ahead and read more about that there. And then I will also drop a link to the streaming platforms if you want to check out the album itself and check out more about the artists and who is involved with the project. But all of that to say is that, in naming some of the elements of this project, my intention is to name some of the ways in which we were able to make folks feel valued, seen, considered, and how that ended up impacting them at the end of the day through their participation. And so I actually want to have us go into a breakout, and I'll just have you all go in pairs, maybe for about 4 minutes. So you'll have 2 minutes each to share. I always like folks to introduce themselves. Please introduce yourself with your name, your pronouns, organization, etc. And then I'd like you to discuss this question, which is, have you ever participated in a program? And that might be a work retreat, a leadership program, a community event, or anything else that really made you feel truly included or seen. What was that program, and what was it that led you to actually feeling that way as you participated in it? And I just threw those questions in the chat for you so you can go back to them as you get into your breakout groups. And give me one moment. And what we'll do is after the breakout group, we will come back into there. And it looks like we're going to have one group of three. So most people are twos and then one group of three. But go ahead and chat about that together in your group. And then we'll come back and I will ask you all as well to share afterwards what came up in your group through that discussion. Does that sound good? Any questions before we move into breakouts? All right, wonderful. Well, I will see you back here in about 4 or so minutes. Thank you, everyone. I am excited to hear about what you chatted about in your group. So, is there anyone who would like to go first? What came up? And Clay, I might pick on you because I watched your unmute happen.
Dun dun dun. We shared about just different experiences we had. Crystal talked about an experience with a coach and ways that she's tried to then emulate that same experience for people that she coaches. I shared an experience about a manager who, for Pride Month, we do all the corporate things. We have the drag brunches, we fly the flag, we have the team's backgrounds, all that kind of stuff. But she left an individual handwritten card and note and sort of basket of goodies on my desk from queer and trans owned businesses, just as an extra effort to make me feel seen and acknowledged. And so it's something that stuck with me that then I've also tried to do for my employees as well.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yet that personal touch, like what a sweet gift. Other folks, what else did you chat about? And now, yeah, Catherine, please. I was going to say I'm going to pick on you because it says you're unmuted. So,
Hey, that's my skill level with this with Zoom. I'm always unmuted or blank. Ramon and I had a nice chat. Just some similarities. We're both immigrants, and we've both had music in our background. Ramon was starting to talk about how it had really influenced him when you cut us off. Unfortunately, I would have liked to have more time to have heard that, and I hope that he would share that with us. But yeah, it was interesting to see, two people from immigrating from different places. I'm from Canada, he's from Mexico, and our adaptations to living in the United States and finding different pathways to deal with some of the issues. How, you know, I went into sports and that was difficult for him, and he went into music, and so it was interesting to hear. And he's in the HR department, and I shared my experience from when I transitioned at work, how my HR department was so very helpful in helping me go through that process. So yeah, it was really cool to hear it. It's amazing how diverse we are, but how some experiences are very similar in things that we do. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Catherine. Anyone else? I'd love to hear maybe from one or two more folks. Thomas, please go ahead.
So me and Ray discussed times that we felt particularly welcome and how that affected us in our organizations. And Ray made a really good point that they got to go to a convention for, trans health and rights and all that good stuff. And then it was predominantly run by QPOC, Women of Color Femmes, and that it was a very um, refreshing experience, I think is the word I would use. Ray, feel free to correct me. And so we were just discussing, like, how do you bring that openness, honesty, genuine realness, and just desire to assist your community into your organization without guilting, shaming, and down talking people or telling them what to do. You know, my suggestion was be the example. If people realize that everybody likes you because you're friendly and nice and welcoming and opening, then they will also want to be that way for the clients that you're helping, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a you catch more flies with honey type of approach to things. And so I hear that in like what you shared, right? And then being able to, share kind of like what I'm hearing is sharing that experience and how impactful it was. And is it through the sharing of like what an impactful experience it was at that conference that can help facilitate some potential change, right? Without that, shaming, as you named it. Yeah.
Absolutely. My suggestion was just like, if like you said, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And if you are nice to people and they see you having an easier time helping people, I imagine that in their brain they would go, I would also like to have an easier time and help more people if they're in your organization, and mimic.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Thomas. Anyone else? What else came up as you thought about spaces and what it was that made you feel seen or welcomed there?
I'll go ahead and go if I may.
Please. Yeah.
So I was chatting with Michael and we were talking about how the pandemic and the lockdowns were the greatest thing that happened to accessibility in recent history. It was because of the lockdowns and work from home that I discovered that I was autistic. Being able to attend a lot of conventions and being able to, attend things online and learn and build leadership and eminence was amazing, and it's really disappointing to see that we're kind of backsliding in that area. It'd be nice if things continued to be available as hybrid, but a lot of the inclusion that I see centers around um, job descriptions and conventions that describe physical, cognitive, and emotional um, output that will be necessary to participate. Places that already have translators available without even having to be asked, places that have subtitles available, that sort of thing. So, it's great to see that that happens, and I think it's something that we have to keep fighting for.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if you relate to this, but I feel like it can be really easy for folks, organizations, whoever it is, to like slip back into default mode of what we're used to, right? And I think historically, a lot of us are just used to status quo and the way kind of things have been in certain areas. And then with those changes, it can open up a lot of like, oh, wow, cool. There's translation available. There are other things available that make things more readily accessible. And then if folks aren't continuing with that intention at the forefront, a lot of those things can kind of like fall to the wayside unintentionally even, right? And one of the things that I think about with that is like I'm someone who's immune compromised. And so, like, for those of you who saw me at NGLCC, you probably saw me with a mask on a lot of the time if I wasn't uh, presenting or whatever. And part of that is because I get sick really easily. And so I have to make sure that I'm masking, especially around people that have been traveling a lot. And one of the things, and I was one of two people that masked at this, couple thousand people conference, right? One of the things that I think about is if I wasn't immune compromised, would I be masking? Is like one of these questions that I have. But because it's at the forefront of my experience all of the time, then becomes something that I've even embedded into projects that I run. So like NDVA, the Neurodivergent Voices album, we had air purifiers in every space that we were ever in. We had masks and tests available at all times for our participants. And so, one of the things that I think about is the way that folks of various lived experience can also help to push those things forward and help keep them at the forefront rather than allowing them to fall by the wayside. And one of the things that I found particularly refreshing, because I'll be honest, I get very self-conscious going to public events like a conference, being one of two people that are masking, right, the entire time. And I was really pleasantly surprised by the folks I interacted with who said, are you sure it's okay to hug you? Right? Like making sure that they were respecting my boundary because they could tell just by me masking that I might, have be immune compromised, et cetera. And other folks who, when we were making dinner plans and I wasn't sure whether I could eat inside or if we should try something outside in Vegas at 110 degrees heat, right? That they defaulted to me. They said, we want you to choose because you're the one that, has that lived experience that you have to navigate. And so I think about that with regard to how we create programs, right? And how do we default to the communities who know their lived experience best? And so when thinking about, creating inclusive programming and what we can learn, and something that I heard from each one of you that shared is what I call the characteristics of inclusive programs. And I think there's three characteristics that we can look at. There might be more. And so I'm happy for all of you to add on to those if you'd like. But the three that I have really honed in on for the purposes of our session today are that we want programs that are community centered, that are community led, and that are community informed. And so, what do I mean by each one of those? So, when we think about programs that have this first characteristic, they're community centered. What we want to think about is programs that are meeting the specific needs of a community. And so, one of the ways we might think about that is if you're doing an in-person event, making sure that there are all gender bathrooms available because trans and gender expansive folks are more than likely going to need all gender bathrooms. And that is something that really is a staple in the community to make sure that everyone has a facility that they can go into that's gender affirming, right? So community-centered means that we're making sure that we're meeting the specific needs of the community. In the, example of me being immune compromised, making sure there are air purifiers available and masks available, right, is a way that that might be community-centered. The second is having something that's community led. So, meaning that we want it led by members of that community. I would say, in general, I don't think this is only true for TGX communities, but really folks of a variety of different marginalized identities and experiences tend to have higher participation in programs where leaders reflect their identities and lived experiences, right? And so one of the ways that we did that in the Neurodivergent Voices album was that we had 4 artist advocates, all who were diverse in terms of their neurodivergence, their race, their gender and sexuality, et cetera, because we really wanted to make sure that the folks that were working most intimately with the artists reflected their identities and lived experiences, and that they were individuals that artists felt comfortable going to say, hey, this is what I need and this is why, right? And sometimes that may have to do with identity, sometimes not. But the thing that we always wanted was to make sure that the artists were comfortable going to who they could. And so having things that are community led are also really important for those purposes. And the last but not least is community informed. We want to make sure that our programs are really informed by community best practices. And so, for example, if you are putting on a leadership program that has facilitators that may or may not be trans or gender expansive, making sure that they're educated on trans and gender expansive best practices, making sure that they are fluidly able to use people's appropriate pronouns, that they're able to notice their own and address their own bias that might come up, et cetera. And so when we think about those 3 areas, we might, realistically, when you think about how to apply that in your own organizations or with your own programs, you might not always be able to hit all 3, right? But if you can do your best to be led, I think, by each 3 of those, and that's what I heard as each of you shared kind of your own examples, is I think or I know that from my experience is what ends up leading to participants in those programs to really feel seen, heard, respected, and like they're going to want to participate in something similar again. So, I'm curious to hear from you all how those characteristics land, and I'm curious to hear, looking at those characteristics of community centered, community led, community informed, where does your organization do that already, or can you already identify areas that might need attention? And Sam, I kind of want to pick on you because I saw you shaking your head up and down a whole lot.
Go ahead. I was going to volunteer, but
Okay.
love being told to volunteer. So I was thinking a lot about sort of Planned Parenthood has launched this new pilot this year called the Digital Youth Advisory Board. And it's a group of 12 folks from our service area who are 18 to 24 years old. And they're really focused on doing a research project that's really going to impact the way that we provide sex education in our service area. And they're really focused on how to address stigma, how is that perpetuated, particularly within their age group. And I was thinking about this aspect of being community informed. And a lot of the project team, we had a lot of conversations around adultism and how do we sort of like guard against that. And so not only for us as like leaders who are putting on this program, like how do we share as like we're all adults, but like how do you share between like staff and like youth participants, and especially like these participants are younger than all the staff are, like how do we really think about like intentional decision making, sharing power, and like doing the work of like making sure we're like guiding this program over the course of the 8 months, but also really making sure that like the youth are the ones who are driving the program, what they want to research, how they want to research that item. And so not just for us as program advisors, but also like thinking about like how do we incorporate youth voice like as an affiliate? Like how are we thinking about the way we hear from 18 to 24-year-olds? How is that shaping the work that we do? So I think that like community informed and community led piece is really important.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that I want to point out about what you named in that program is, there's the participants that you have in the program who are youth, and then you have, your affiliate that's running it, who doesn't, you're not in that age group, right? And negotiating what that responsibility is between how do you make sure that you're really listening to what is being told by the participants. And so I love that because even in situations, I thought about this a lot with the Neurodivergent Voices album, was just in being in a leadership position, how do you make sure that the locus of power is actually still held within the participants, right? And that might have to do with, letting go of ego or letting go of, but I had the vision of this. But then you find out through, participants actually what they want is this, though. And having to sometimes, kind of let go of what certain aspects are that you might have wanted to see through that participants are saying, actually, that's not what we need, though, right? And so it's being able to also negotiate that as a leadership skill, I think, is really, really important. And so I love hearing how you all are navigating that as a team right now. Yeah. Other folks, does anyone else want to share? How do these characteristics land with you? Is there any one that's sticking out, or how are you thinking about applying them in your own organization or your own programs? And if it's okay, if I don't have an immediate volunteer, Ramon or Michael, I know we haven't heard from either of you. Would one of you be willing to share any of your thoughts?
Sure. So, I mean, I happen to lead an organization that's about people with rare diseases, and I happen to be a rare disease patient myself. So, a lot of the things that you talked about, Rex, from, masking and from, types of contact that people are willing to do, immunocompromised patients, like all of our programming is first and foremost to keep a safe and supportive environment for rare disease patients. So we do things like, like our name badges have are color coded for the level of interaction that you want to have with other people. So if you're a green, you're a hugger. If you're a yellow, you may do an elbow bump. If you're a red, like you may not want any physical contact at all. We have, as I was talking to Autumn, which was a great conversation, we have signage and emails that go out that describe the level of physical and emotional and mental activity for every event, every part aspect of the event, so people can like unilaterally opt out if it's too burdensome on them, either physically or emotionally or mentally. Um, I think because we are an advocacy organization, I think we do a good job of creating an environment where people who are members of the community, we are led by people who are members of the community who self-identify as members of the community. So I mean, it, uh, it sounds self-serving to give give an organization that I'm part of credit, but I think we actually do a really good job of being, um, not just accommodations, which are like, in my opinion, kind of the lowest, like the minimum bar for it, but making sure that people felt seen and heard, in every way that we possibly can.
I love that. And yeah, thank you for sharing all those like really specific examples too, because I know for me, it gives me a lot of thoughts and ideas on future programming as well. And the ways that the variety of different ways that you can meet those community needs. And so I love hearing it, and I'm seeing a lot of folks nodding their heads as well. So thank you for sharing that. Well, thank you all. I love hearing these different thoughts and the ways that you're thinking about this and the way that this is showing up in your organization. And we've got about 10, 15 minutes left of our session, and so I wanted to make sure that there was time and room for Q&A with this as well. I know that there was a couple of questions that came in ahead of time I wanted to address, and we'll get to those. But since we're on this topic right now, are there any questions that have come up that you all want to ask right now around this greater topic that we've been discussing so far?
Rex, I do have a question.
Susie, please. Yeah.
Regarding like special accommodations and things like that. Like do we have to notify like anybody in the county or just our agency? I'm not sure if you know what I'm talking about.
So I'm not directly with LA County, so let me name that really quickly. I partnered with them on a project, but I don't directly work for LA County. I do sit on one of their boards for the Department of Mental Health for the LGBTQ plus community. They have underserved cultural committees. So just to name that really quickly. That said, are you talking about when someone requests accommodations, for example, for ASL interpreters, et cetera?
Yes, and specifically, like for example, if we were to have an event, to have like a um just like specific needs that somebody might need, because everybody needs accommodation sometimes. I do actually go to the LGBTQA plus USCC meeting as well. But I've never asked that question. But if you don't have the answer, that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we should absolutely ask at our next meeting. It's next week, so that's perfect. And what I can tell you how they navigated it with me with the Neurodivergent Voices album. Because we were a contractor, we really were responsible for meeting any accommodation requests, and that's something that we sourced through assessment at a couple different points during the project. So as soon as we knew who the artists were, we had artist advocates do a direct assessment of each of the artists to understand any needs or general accommodations that they needed that weren't already being met to make sure that we could meet those. And that was anywhere from dietary restrictions to sensory needs to masking needs, et cetera. The other place that we did this, and then that was kind of like a constant ongoing conversation as needs changed throughout the project with artists as well. But then when we had our final album launch event, where we had a big 100-person event, we also asked folks to submit. We basically in the description of the event told folks all of the different COVID precautions that we were taking, seating availability as needed, since there was some seating and some standing room, and folks could reserve seats ahead of time if they needed to make sure that they had a seat for themselves. And we also made visual descriptions of the actual venue space itself so that ahead of time, folks, if they had any physical disabilities, also knew how they would actually enter the space, because it had like a certain lip that needed to get over for folks that might have been using a wheelchair, for example, in the front. But also, we wanted anyone with additional sensory needs ahead of time to know what the space looked and felt like to the best of our ability beforehand so that they were more comfortable once they actually got to the event. Instead of, I don't know how many of you have had that experience where you show up somewhere for the first time and you're like, really taking it in and it can be a bit overwhelming, right? And so we wanted to help with that as much as possible at the forefront as well. We were in charge of all of facilitating all of that. And then we also had a form ahead of time asking folks to let us know of any additional accommodations. We did have ASL interpreters that were already there regardless. And that was also something that we had to provide as the vendor. LA County didn't provide any additional accommodations. But I hope that helps. Thomas, yes.
I just wanted to ask if there, so it can be difficult to even just something as basic as asking pronouns because you might be unknowingly asking someone to out themselves. And I've met a lot of people that don't like those kinds of questions because they're not public with their identities or they aren't comfortable discussing being autistic or because of stigma and stuff like that. So any ideas on, I mean, the form is a very good idea beforehand so that you know who needs what without having to discuss it in front of everybody. Um, I just any suggestions for figuring that part out, like how to figure out what everyone's needs are without ostracizing them and outing them and pointing at them and being like, hey, you weirdo.
Yeah.
Like we just want to make everyone feel comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one, I think, if there are forms that you have to submit ahead of time, I would say that making things anonymized, right, is helpful so that folks can submit anonymous requests. And then in terms of, the question of pronouns, and this is something that when we're educating about pronouns, we talk about a lot because there are folks in the greater trans and gender expansive community who, for a variety of reasons, might not want to be asked for pronouns, whether it's because they want to be able to move stealthily in that place without folks knowing that they are trans. Whether they've tried so hard and done so much work in order to align, their appearance with their gender identity, that they want people to just assume, and that actually that feels affirming to them, right? So there's a variety of different reasons why that may happen. And so, what I tell folks in general is, if let's say you're holding an event and folks have the option to put pronouns on their name badge, is if someone doesn't have their pronouns, not alienating them for it, right? The other way that you can navigate this too is rather than saying, "Oh, what are your pronouns?" is just asking, "How do you like to be referred to?" And then folks can take that as they will, as either saying, "Oh, you can just call me Rex," or, "Oh, yeah, I'm Rex, I use they, them pronouns," right? And it gives that individual a bit more agency for navigating that moment. So hopefully that is helpful. But that's great. Great question, Thomas. I wanted to get to at least one more question because we got one question. Clay, I had gotten your question through the chat box. And so I wanted to bring that in here, which was, in light of all the legislation around trans lives, is anyone doing anything proactively to help ensure our trans team members continue to have access to healthcare? Which is such a great question. And I know a question a lot of folks in organizations have been asking, considering the current climate and considering how quickly legislation is changing state to state and even in certain counties around accessible healthcare. We've seen healthcare changing in a variety of places, whether that be specifically for youth or whether that be things like there being laws against a doctor providing certain types of care. And so even just having access in certain states, even if your healthcare provider technically allows it, where there's discrepancies there as well. The first thing that I'll say is, is anyone doing anything to proactively help? Yes, there's a lot of advocacy organizations that are doing a lot of work right now in general to fight against the legislation that's happening. And one of them is Advocates for Trans Equality, which was previously the Center for Trans Equality. And so I can drop a link to them and specifically their healthcare part of their website. But the other thing that I'm seeing, and this has been happening for kind of years in general in the guidance that I give to organizations when we're talking about healthcare, is having additional options for healthcare that aren't a part of your typical insurance package. And so there are organizations such as Folks Health or Plume, and they are digital healthcare providers that are specifically provide gender affirming care to trans and gender expansive folks. And there's also organizations and entities like Included Health and LGBTQ Health Directory that specifically list affirming providers, not only for gender affirming care, but for things like mental health care, or if you need to if you think you're getting arthritis and need an x-ray, etc., to make sure that the providers themselves are affirming regardless of the type of care that you're looking for. And so I'll drop those into the chat. The other thing I'm going to include in that is some mental health resources, because I think in general, and that's good to know that Folks is amazing. The other, I like to include mental health resources along with healthcare resources, especially given the current climate. And so and especially considering that we've seen crisis hotlines and things like that being rolled back for LGBT communities specifically. But is that helpful?
Yes, it is. One of the other things that we've been talking about internally is what does it mean? So our headquarters is in Georgia. We are very much a purple state. We have two Democratic senators while we have a Republican governor. And so we've been talking about what does it mean if, from a corporate perspective, for our corporate team members who are in Georgia or who are in states where they're banning trans healthcare, do we pay for the cost for our team members to travel to another state where healthcare is legal? Do we provide compensation for that? Sort of what does that look like just as a holistic thing? And we don't have answers to that. I don't have answers to that, but it's the conversations that are happening. So I'm just open to all the things. So thank you for those resources. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one other thing I'll say in regards to that is, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, we saw a lot of organizations who said, whatever state you're in, if you need abortion care or any type of reproductive health care, we will pay for travel costs for you to go to another state to get the care that you needed. And organizations started taking that on as a policy lens. And so I believe organizations should absolutely do the same for trans health care. And that's not only going to be directly for trans and gender expansive employees, it will also impact parents who have kids, right, who are trans and gender expansive. And so if you're in a position to create a policy that looks like that, where that support can be provided, absolutely. In addition to that, the folks in Plume are both digital options for care. They will know more directly on what that looks like in terms of providing care to individuals who are in states where it's under attack.
I don't want to interrupt, but there are two sources that I have from being from Florida where my care was banned for the past year and a half, and I went 6 months without my hormones. Um, I don't know that they want me to be announcing them out loud to large groups of people and things like that, but if anybody needs access, a free flight to a doctor in a state where they will not give your medical records away, California, Colorado, Washington, D.C., um, it's free. You just have to tell them that you're trans and that you need a ride there, and they set everything up. It's private airplanes most of the time, and they bring you back. And other than that, there's also a group called Queer Doc that they are okay with being public. They will send hormones to any state. They don't care if it's illegal.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So that's great. And, Queer Trans Project, they're based out of Florida. They also help with flights for gender affirming care. And so they've been on our roundtable before, and they're just a phenomenal organization. Um,
Yeah,
now,
if anyone wants the name of the other place, just message me and I'll send it to you.
awesome. Thank you so much, Thomas. I can't believe that it's already noon, or we have 1 minute left, and I would love to be able to spend more time. This has been a great conversation, and I really appreciate everyone being here and your participation today. And I have a couple just quick logistic announcements before we end. We have two more roundtables this year. I can't believe it is pretty much September at this point. But our next roundtable is going to be on Wednesday, October 15th. And then our final roundtable of the year will be on Wednesday, November 19th. You will all get this as a replay in the email tomorrow. So take a look and check that out. And I will include the resources that were shared in the chat here today. So I'll make sure that those are in the email as well. But with that, thank you all so very much. If you have any other questions or want to continue the conversation as well, feel free to email me. I'm more than happy for us to chat offline or outside of the round table about any of these things that came up today. So thank you all so very much, and I'll look forward to seeing you all in October.